All right. Wait till we get the slides up on the screen. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your time today. It's middle of the afternoon, so we're going to start today's session with a question. So I want you to think, in your opinion, which person has had the most influence on the games industry? Which one person do you think, in your opinion, has had the most influence on the games industry? Think about it. Still thinking. Maybe you think it's Will Wright. You're a big fan of The Sims and SimCity. Maybe you've looked out towards the east. You played some of Hideo Kojima's games, and you're a fan of Hideo Kojima. Maybe you're a tech nerd, like I am, and you think it's John Carmack. Could be. So hands up in the room, how many of you thought of this gentleman, Chris Anderson? Not a single hand up in the room. Who's heard of Chris Anderson? One person in the room. So Chris Anderson was the bass player for a music group called REM. And some of you might be thinking, hang on a minute, the bass player of REM is Mike Mills, not Chris Anderson. There were, in fact, two groups called REM that came out of the state of Georgia in the United States of America several decades ago. And there could be only one. So what they did to decide which group had the rights, had the permission to carry on with the REM name, they had a battle of the bands. The two bands performed together on stage, and unfortunately for our hero, Chris Anderson, his punk band, REM, lost. And the other band called REM won and went on to become a worldwide famous American rock group. So the punk industry's loss turns out to be the games industry's gain. Because what Chris Anderson went on to do after giving up on his dreams of becoming a music celebrity, he gave up on his music career and he decided to follow one of his other passions, which was economics. And what Chris's work was focused on, seen through the lens of the games industry, was this problem. The problem is that making games, as we know, is expensive. And so as a result, you need a lot of investment frequently. And of course, there is a pressure then for the game to be profitable. And so the impact of that problem means that when you're making a game, there is a large amount of stress and pressure to ensure that you make as much money as possible after you launch the game. And the root cause of this problem is that in traditional games, let's say games where you pay up front to buy the game, the only real opportunity to make money is when the game is launched, in that initial launch window. And this was the problem that Chris Anderson was looking at and studying. And so what he was interested in was this idea of monetizing any product, not just a game, over a long period of time, not just in that initial launch window, but over a long period of time. And so Chris Anderson did a lot of research and published a couple of books and articles around the idea of the long tail. So the long tail says that beyond an initial boom after launching a product or launching a game, if you design a game well, you can monetize it over a long period of time. And thanks to Chris Anderson's work, we have, well, partially thanks to his work, we have the free-to-play game movement, which, as we all know, has been very successful and is increasingly successful these days. And the idea of the free-to-play movement is that we're not just monetizing at the start, but we're monetizing throughout this whole period of the long tail. And it's led to in-app purchases, adverts, as we've just been hearing about in the previous sessions, subscriptions, and other ways of monetizing beyond that initial purchase. And that's had quite a significant success in our industry. However, it leads to a new problem. And that is that any game will start to lose user numbers over time naturally. Very few of us play games for years and years and years, right? It's a natural consequence of gaming that you tend to lose interest in a game. And so the impact of that problem is that the long-tail revenue naturally decreases. So if your game hasn't been successful to start off with, things are only going to get worse as you lose the opportunity to monetize that long tail. And the root cause of this problem is that your game doesn't have the ways and the mechanics of retaining users, of keeping users interested over time. The longer a gamer is spending playing the game, the more chance you have to monetize that gamer. And so to understand the long tail fully, what you need to understand is that while it reduces that initial pressure on post-launch sales, it increases pressure on perhaps one of the most important metrics that we all know about, especially in free-to-play gaming, which is player retention, and particularly retention in the long term, as in beyond 30 days. Yeah? So many free-to-play games now, and in fact, non-free-to-play games, many games offer downloadable content and in-app purchases beyond the initial purchase. They focus on retention mechanics, different retention mechanics that exist to maintain that player base, to keep players interested and keep them playing the game and ultimately paying money, right? And I've separated these retention mechanics kind of into two different areas. We can call them, I guess, hard retention mechanics and soft retention mechanics, if you like. And the hard ones are fairly obvious. The first and most important retention mechanic you need to implement is make a great game. If your game sucks, no one's going to play it for a long time. So you need to have a good game. The second thing you can do is implement cooperative and multiplayer elements to your game. Yeah, so competitive or cooperative multiplayer modes which engage users as they are not just playing against the game, but they're playing against or with other real people. And of course, you need to have a strong investment in live ops and updates, DLC, for your game to maintain fresh content to keep people interested. And there are many games that do this very well, and we don't have to look further than, say, Fortnite, for an example, or World of Warcraft is another one, for games that implement these hard mechanics in a very well-understood way. However, there are these soft mechanics as well that we can use to increase our player retention, right? One is to reward players. So when they're carrying out actions in the game, we reward them, whether it's with cards or in-game items or soft currency or whatever you like. Another way is to encourage user-generated content. That's a huge topic right now in the games industry, allowing users to create their own content in the game and share it. So adding a personalized element to the game and giving the user more agency. And that leads to the third point, which is to build a community. If you manage to build a community outside of the game, whether it's present in Discord or whether it's present on, Twitter or Facebook or wherever your community is, then you're allowing your users to engage themselves in the game as well. And what I want to talk today about, more than anything, and the reason that I've introduced this concept of retention in the long tail, is I want to talk about how Web3 technologies can augment these soft retention mechanics and help increase the retention in a game and therefore help retain users and monetize those users for the game in the future. Now, many of you might have heard of the term Web3, but it's worth explaining a little bit where it comes from. So Web 1 was, back in the day, in the 1990s, was all about reading, consuming content passively. And Web 1 was superseded by Web 2, where we were allowed, where the technologies were developed that permitted us to contribute to the web. Yeah, so we had blogs and social networks and other elements, image sharing sites, other elements, ways of writing our own content onto the web. And so if we want to have one word that describes what Web3 is, it's ownership. It's, I own this piece of digital content, and therefore I have the right to do whatever I want with it. For example, I can sell it to somebody else, or I can keep it, I can loan it, I can do whatever I want with it because it's mine. And that's a very new concept in the digital world. In the physical world, I have a phone, here it is, it's clearly mine, I can sell it to you for however many dollars or dinar that I want to offer it for. In the digital world, the concept of ownership is still quite new, but that's what Web3 is all about. It's all about owning digital content. So far in the games industry, what that's led to has been essentially games that use ownership and artificial scarcity of ownership as a core game mechanic. So you might call these games blockchain games if you want, and they generally feature in-app or in-game items in the form of NFTs, non-fungible tokens that you own. You can prove that you own them on the blockchain, and you can sell them to other people. And what traditionally happens here is that you might own a NFT in the game. It's quite rare, it's one of 10 or one of 100, and you're waiting for somebody else to come and buy it from you at a price which is set by the market. And the problem with this approach is that that price is set by speculation. It's set by people offering you an amount of money for your item based on nothing more than the fact that it's one of 10 or one of 1,000. And that means that this model of speculation is only sustained by having more and more players coming into your game. If you own a token and there's no one there to buy it, then what's its value? It's kind of worthless, right? So you have to have a game that has an ever-increasing number of players arriving in the bottom of the pyramids in order to purchase, to provide value to these tokens. And as a result, you can see that many blockchain games have curves, user curves, that look a bit like this. This comes from Axie Infinity, which you might have heard of, very successful game. It had a massive growth of users, and now it's dropped down as the number of users has fallen off and the value of the tokens in the game has dropped down as well. So that leads us to a final problem, right? The Web3 problem, which is that games that implement this technology, if you like, this blockchain approach, tend towards this boom and bust cycle, which is kind of a similar problem to what we had before. And so the impact of that is, then Web3 doesn't really solve anything. So why should we bother with it? Why all the fuss about NFT and blockchain at all? And the root cause of that, in my opinion, is because the tokens that you're buying and selling, the NFTs, are these static, immutable items. You can only use them as collectibles. They have no other value. Maybe you can use them as part of the game, but they never change. You're just collecting them. And that means that their value is only going to be based on speculation as to how rare they are. So what I'm interested in is, can we move that conversation of Web3 and digital ownership in games beyond speculation and one to earned value, whereby the value of the tokens is dependent on what the user, the gamer, actually does with them, as opposed to just how rare they are? Let's see some examples and think of some use cases. So for example, imagine a football game, right? You have a football manager game, a multiplayer game where you're doing the usual things you would do with a football game. You set your team, your tactics, you choose the formation of your team, choose which players play in which position, and so on and so forth. And you play games, and crucially, as you play the game, you can train your players. Yeah, so they get fitter and faster and stronger, they score more goals, etc. That means that you can turn a 3-star player into a 6-star player by playing the game, by spending time playing the game. That means the value of that player on the marketplace depends on how well you have played the game. If you've played the game well, you've turned your player into a superstar, and it means you can sell that player at a price determined by how well you've done and not just how rare that player is. So this is an example of providing earned value in the game because you've earned it, because you've put the work in, as opposed to simply waiting for the market speculation to assign a price to your token. You can also go the other way. I don't know if you remember the Tamagotchis out of Japan 20 years ago. They had an amazing retention mechanic, these small digital toys, digital pets, that unless you went back and gave them virtual food and virtual medicine and virtual attention every day, they would die. What an amazing retention mechanic. And you can do the same with in-game assets as well. Imagine a football player that unless you train that player every day, they get fat, right? So their value, obviously, their impact in the game goes down, and their value on the marketplace also goes down. We actually did this in a game called Goal Revolution, a football manager game, which is now being rebranded with a world-famous football IP. It was soft launched in a single country, and you can see the monthly active users in this graph here. And as you expect, with very little marketing and user acquisition, there was an initial rise of users. And as you might expect, as we saw in the previous graph, the users start going down. But look at what happens around day 30, 35. Suddenly that curve of users flattens off and then begins to go up again. And this is with no user acquisition, no advertising spend, no efforts to really gain more users. This game had a day 30 retention value of over 40%, which is practically unheard of. And that's because the users of the game were incentivized to come back, not only because it was a great, fun football manager game, but because they didn't want to lose the value of the assets. They were involved in the trading. It was another mechanic of the game that drove the retention. And again, it's a great game which has a Web3 component, as opposed to being a blockchain game. In fact, in this case, the gamers, the users, didn't even know that their players were NFTs, right? Every single one of their players was an NFT, and the gamer did not know anything about that. They didn't care. All they knew is they could sell and buy and sell and trade those players with other users of the game for real money. So another retention mechanic, as I mentioned, was user-generated content, right? The permission, or you're giving users permission to customize their own material and then use it in the game. Why not then allow those users to sell those items to other people as well? Yeah? You're increasing that retention by giving the players the agency, the power to create their own custom content and sell it. I am proudly from Wales, the country in the UK, which has the best flag in the whole world. If you hadn't seen the Welsh dragon on the Welsh flag, then go and look it up. If I were creating some user-generated content in a car game, for example, I would paint my car with the Welsh flag, right? Someone else from Wales might find that very valuable and might give me money for the effort that I've made in painting that flag. Someone from England, maybe less so, right? Wales and England traditionally are friends and enemies at the same time. So giving users the power to customize their content, why not allow them to sell that content as well, driving retention in the game? Another thing we talked about for driving retention is community building and social media engagement. So one thing we do at Freeverse in another half of our company really is when we deal with different brands, is we allow Web 2 methods of engagement, such as retweeting, making something a trending topic, sharing on Instagram, posting on Discord. We allow that activity, we link that activity to a Web3 token, almost a reward token for that brand. So you allow users different access, different rewards for their NFT based on how active they've been in social media and in social media participation over the previous period of time. So let's imagine you start off with a level 1 NFT. It's literally worthless. When you get to level 5, you get VIP access to a conference. When you get to level 10, you get to meet a celebrity or get a discount or get some free clothes or free material, whatever. Yeah? You can upgrade that NFT by engaging with that brand on social media. So the brand gets an increased exposure through the user's social media activity, and the user gets a reward, which they can then sell for other people as well. So again, here we're seeing Web3 solving problems, not just existing because it should exist, but it's solving problems. Not only are we rewarding players for the time by allowing NFTs to level up, right? Not only are we encouraging user-generated content, which we can then tokenize and sell on secondary markets, but we're also building communities by linking Web 2 engagement to Web 3 rewards. And so this is a benefit, these are concrete benefits that Web 3 technology can bring to your game. Not only an increased retention, but an increased monetization, but also an increasing player acquisition as well. So what I want to do is change that conversation around Web3 and NFTs away from speculation and more to what problems can this technology actually solve in the games industry today. And if we do that, then the opportunities for this long tail suddenly move in this direction. Yeah? Suddenly we can increase that monetization, increase that retention with Web3. And we're flipping this graph around on itself. We're acknowledging, yes, there is a traditional way of monetizing a game at the start. We're acknowledging that that monetization will drop. And we're using Web3 methods and techniques to increase that monetization gradually over time, or at least stabilize it. So what's stopping us from doing this? There are two things. The first is that NFTs, if you know anything about blockchain NFTs, it's quite hard to do them at scale. And the second is, as I mentioned before, is that current NFTs are only collectibles. Let's treat both of these in turn. So the first is scalability. So if you're interested in the field, you may have heard of CryptoKitties. It was the first NFT game, came out about 5 years ago on the Ethereum blockchain. And it had 10,000 daily active users. And it crashed the blockchain with 10,000 daily active users. Skip forward 5 years to another blockchain game that came out on Polygon, which is an acceleration layer for Ethereum. It should go faster. And with 500,000 weekly active users, slightly more respectable, but still not huge, it also crashed Polygon. Now, you may think that 500,000 users is a lot. In the mainstream games industry, 500,000 users is peanuts. It's a soft launch for a major studio. It's not even that, yeah? So we have this problem whereby you cannot create enough NFTs without crashing the underlying technology, the blockchain that goes underneath it. You need a way of accelerating those NFTs in order to make them reach the mainstream. The second, as I mentioned, is that NFTs right now are static. They are just collectibles. Now that's fine, because people do collect things in the real world. People collect stamps, trading cards. My colleague Alex collects guitars. Why not, right? People like collecting things. But if you look at the size of the global economy, the collectibles economy is only a very small fraction of it in the real world. And what I think we can do is extend this idea of the digital economy away from just collectibles as well. If we have NFTs that can evolve and change based on how they are used, we are changing this passive activity of collecting NFTs into an active engagement. Yeah, allowing those NFTs to evolve and change based on what the user does. At Freeverse, we call this concept the living asset NFT. Yeah, NFTs that can change and evolve and that have a life. And if we do that, then we change that conversation of NFTs. We move it away from this very unpopular conversation that exists in the games industry right now. If you mention NFTs right now, people tend to go, ooh, they either like it or they don't, and many of them don't like it because they are associated with speculation and scarcity. And if we move that conversation towards earned value, then the price that people are going to pay for NFTs depends on the user's actions and the engagement. And that makes it a much more active and clearly an engaging process. And we call this at Freeverse living assets. And crucially, what we think this does is that it solves problems. If we look into the past, the move from the pay-up-front gaming model to the free-to-play gaming model took time, but ultimately it opened up a completely new marketplace, a completely new way of creating and playing and monetizing games. And at Freeverse, we think a similar thing is going to happen in the blockchain space. We're going to move away from NFT 1.0, if you like, which is all driven by scarcity and hype and boom and bust, and move towards this concept of dynamic NFTs, living assets, where you get more attention, more engagement, and more monetization over that long tail. And if we do this, then we can really pay homage, if you like, to Chris Anderson's initial vision of how to monetize a product over a long term rather than just over that initial launch period. That's kind of what we do at Freeverse. We are a layer 2. We're a platform that allows game developers to integrate and add and convert, I guess, any in-game item into an NFT without necessarily even the player knowing it. All of our NFTs are dynamic. They are evolving. They can change according to the rules that you set. We are scalable. You can create thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of NFTs on our platform. We swallow all the gas costs. There are no problems with scaling. You can charge a recurring revenue every time your NFT is traded, or those NFTs are traded in between users. It can be 2, 5, 10. You can go full Apple and charge 30% if you want. Because we're a layer 2, it means we're very eco-friendly. We use a fraction of the energy of a regular NFT minting service. And you can trade all the NFTs on our platform in pretty much any cryptocurrency and also pretty much any major fiat currency now as well. My name's Alun Evans. That's what we do at Freeverse. If you'd like to contact me or find me, then I'm here at our booth, or feel free to send me an email or connect me on LinkedIn. Thank you for your time. Thank you.